Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Anna Kalczeńska. According to Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukrainians must take every air raid alert seriously in the coming days. According to experts, Russia is planning to use 15 Kinzhal rockets, drones and 90 ballistic missiles. The United States believes that Russian President Vladimir Putin's threatened retaliation against Ukraine over its drone attack last weekend has not happened yet in earnest and is likely to be a significant multi-pronged strike. To discuss the latest development in Ukraine as well as the inefficient U.S. diplomacy, I'm joined by Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief, Kyiv Post. Good morning, sir. Thank you for being with us again. It's always a pleasure to
Good morning. My pleasure, as always.
So, large kinetic strikes targeting civilian infrastructure, that's sadly the Russian modus operandi, be it a retaliation following a strike on military objectives or just an unprovoked attack. So, women and children die because of Kremlin's revenge. This brings a question. What is an acceptable means of defense for Ukraine?
Well, look, the Russian attacks continue to be indiscriminate. They are hitting cities all over the country. Last night it was Rivne, not just Kyiv. Odessa is often hit. Dnipro, Sumy, of course, Kharkiv. Kharkiv took a heavy pounding last week just in the center of the city. Sumy likewise. Ukrainians have been targeting military objectives, airports, as we know, but also factories producing the war materials and drones and powder, gunpowder and other stuff for the Russian war effort. So right now, Ukraine is desperate for to beef up its air defenses because it's aware that Russia is not going to stop. Russia is encouraged by Trump's attitude, and if I may be so bold, even by the new Polish president's statement to the Hungarians over the weekend that he's not in support of Ukraine joining NATO or even the EU, a blow to the Ukrainians. And they look to the coalition of the willing, of the committed, in other words, to provide at least the basic tools, weapons with which to close the sky. And they are missing. Ukrainians are producing a great deal of drones, and they're managing to strike deep within Russia. But they need also the defense systems to stop the Russians from pounding daily. This is not, we're expecting a big attack, an even bigger attack. But what have the last attacks been in the last few days? They've been massive attacks too.
Since you mentioned the air attacks, Trump administration redirected 20,000 anti-drone missiles meant for Ukraine. That's according to Volodymyr Zelensky. Again, it's up to the U.S. administration's discretion, of course, to decide about who to hand over the technology. However, how can Ukraine win the war otherwise than by eliminating the threat from the air, from the sky?
Well, Ukraine realizes that without strong support from its traditional partners and friends, it can't win the war, but at least it can work towards some kind of more just and, let's say, lasting settlement. I mean, there could be a ceasefire, for example, but the ceasefire will be used by the Russians to regroup and just attack in a week or a month or even a year's time. So we need a lasting peace and a just peace, which is not, on Trump's terms. Just give them everything they've grabbed, and you two kids in the playground stop squabbling, as he put it last week, as opposed to saying this is a bully, pedophile, if you want, that's raided a schoolyard. And instead of comparing it to a David and Goliath struggle, he equates the two as if these are two just sort of troublesome neighbors. And this attitude doesn't help. But what does help is the strong position taken by the new German Chancellor Merz and his very polished performance in Washington, including in the Oval Office, and the strong support that Ukraine continues to get from most of the European countries, excepting Orban and perhaps one or two others nowadays.
So let's go now to the Eastern Front in Dnipro. What's the situation there? Russia claims some new advancements.
The Russians are slowly advancing, but I think what has to be emphasized is not the kilometers that they are gaining, but the huge casualties that they are taking. Look, they are up to almost 1 million casualties over the last 3.5 years. That is, killed, wounded, maimed, incapacitated. That's a huge loss, and they are losing around, according to Western sources, from 1,000 to 1,500 soldiers a day, not to talk about military equipment. So it's costing them a lot. But of course, you can get away with it if you have a regime that doesn't take into account human life and human costs. And so Putin can, sit it out and wait for another village, another town to be taken. The danger for Ukraine, of course, is that the Russians are advancing, as they've always said, they want to take all of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions within their administrative borders, but they are also pounding Sumy, which is very close to the Russian border in the northeast of Ukraine, Kharkiv, also very close to the Russian border, and trying as best they can to break into central Ukraine in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions. And that's hurting the Ukrainians a lot, because you've got the nuclear power station, the biggest in Europe, in Zaporizhia, which the Russians want to hold as a kind of time bomb at the very heart of Ukraine, but which threatens Ukraine's immediate neighbors, particularly to the west. And they want to break through, if they can, closer towards Odessa, to if they could, to try and assert even greater control than they had temporarily in the Black Sea region.
So you've mentioned it before that Donald Trump is emboldening Russia when he speaks of the retaliation after the Operation Spider's Web, aiming and targeting the long-range bombers. So the Ukrainians gave Putin a reason to bomb them to hell, says Donald Trump. Where do you see hope right now? What has to happen and what can happen after the Istanbul talks, which brought no results? So what are we expecting?
I think somebody should say publicly to Trump, the Japanese attacked you in Pearl Harbor. You shouldn't have escalated the war. You should have said, let's make peace with the Japanese. They play a tough game. Why didn't the Americans do that, for example? Or after D-Day, the Americans took a lot of casualties. Why didn't President Roosevelt say, no point messing with Hitler. Let's make a peace term. Let's forget about the Brits and the Poles and everything. Washington and Berlin can sort it out. This is the kind of logic that Trump is promoting. And I think our first hope is that within Washington circles, people say enough, whether they think that the man is deranged or whether he's just an imbecile or whether he's perhaps an agent of, a latter-day Manchurian candidate. Whatever the issue is, that they will say, Donald, enough. Look, even the public tide in America is turning against you. People who voted for you said this is not the America that we voted for. This isn't making America great. It's making us look pathetic in terms of the world. Second hope is Europe uniting and delivering on its political statements in support of Ukraine. That has begun to happen. And it's not just the big countries that I've mentioned, but even, the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, for example, Holland, they're all playing their bit. Poland is playing its bit. But, we are hoping that Poland's active role in that coalition of the committed, of the willing, is not going to falter out now that you have a new president that is shall we say, in his first move is moving closer to Orban than he is to Ukraine. And thirdly, I think Turkey. Turkey is a factor. Turkey certainly doesn't want to see the Black Sea become a Russian sea. It has its own interests. So behind the scenes, I hope Turkey will play its role. On a more minimal level, Rome and its diplomacy, the new Pope, at least that is embarrassing for the Moscow Patriarchate. And last but not least, the Arabic countries. They're interested in the oil factor. And depending on how Trump plays his cards, whether he goes for sanctions under pressure from senators who have already launching a bill to impose very heavy sanctions, whether they will find it convenient to set a level at about $30 for oil, which will will affect the Russian economy very seriously. So there's a number of factors, but let me tell you, I'm in Kyiv at the moment, and I just spent the weekend here after a very heavy bombing, and we're living here between heaven and hell. Hell every night, the sirens. Last night I checked before the program. We had an air alert more or less all through the night, and we had one for half an hour just before I went on air. Heaven. I went to a fantastic exhibition of wine and cheese in the outskirts of Kyiv. Young people are there. The spirits are, despite their loved ones being at the front and despite the invalids, are defiant, are strong, and life goes on. So I say we're living here on the fringe of Europe between heaven and hell, and we hope to find our place in heaven as opposed to be forever in limbo.
Hard to imagine how long such a situation can endure. Thank you so much, Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief, Kyiv Post. Thank you for joining us from Kyiv and for your insights, as always.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. This is World Talks here on TVP World. Please stay tuned for more news and continuous coverage.